Good morning, and thank you for allowing us to come tell you about ESOPS, which stand for Employee Stock Ownership Plans. And as I was listening to some of the issues that family businesses go through, I think we're gonna shed a different perspective of how ESOPs may or may not be a solution to assist with the transition of a family business. So what we're going to do today is tell you the basics of an ESOP. Then I'm going to have Greg tell his story, snapshot version. We've only got 45 minutes.
I could go on.
And then we're going to go through and talk about how ESOPs fit in different situations. And Greg will then offer some commentary from time to time on whether those were key considerations for him when determining an ESOP made sense. So let's just start here. Let's talk about what are some ESOP basics. Two main things I want you to know about an ESOP. Number one, it's a retirement plan. It's very similar to a 401k. The difference is an ESOP is allowed to buy and hold stock of the company that sponsors the ESOP. So you've got a 401k that would be invested in stocks and bonds in the marketplace. An ESOP is invested in the company that you work for. ESOPs they have special privileges. They're allowed to borrow money. They're allowed to own company stock in high concentrations. And that sets up for number two, which sets up an ESOP as an ownership transition vehicle. An ESOP can own part or all of a company. And in fact, an ESOP can create a perpetual owner. Because, as you know, with any individual, they're eventually going to have to sell for one reason or another. There are trusts, and actually an ESOP is a trust. When you set up an ESOP as a plan, there is a related employee stock ownership trust. And that's really what you do when you set up an ESOP, is this perpetual owner that is a retirement plan. And as we get into the next one, the main benefits of this particular retirement plan, it's exempt from federal and state income taxes. So there's some financial benefits that we will talk about next. So if I were to tell you some key characteristics that you'd want to know about ESOPs, it separates the liquidity event from the management transition. And I think that can be very helpful in situations, especially when you're dealing with family. You may want to begin the financial transition of the business, but yet the individuals are not ready to hand over the reins. Greg will be a good example of that. As he went through, he's still running the company and has no plans to stop running it for any time soon. But by selling to an ESOP, you set the financial transition in motion. An ESOP sale is always a stock sale, and that has financial benefits, and it has legal benefits, tax benefits, many benefits of selling in a stock sale rather than an asset sale. An ESOP can always pay the full value of what a company is worth. However, an ESOP cannot pay more than fair market value, and that means a synergistic premium. So in other words, you can get the full amount that your company's worth, but if there's some other company that will pay 20% more than what you're worth, you won't be able to get that extra 20%. The next point is, if you have an S corporation ESOP, and the ESOP is the sole owner of the company no longer has federal or state income tax liability. So selling to an ESOP can turn the company into a tax-exempt company, basically. And what that means is that's cash flow savings. And I've got a next slide that will just show you that. It's a very powerful, because I know as I'm listening to the family transition, I think one of the challenges is how are you going to come up with the resources to fund the transition? Either the next generation needs the capital, or you're going to have to use that, likely after-tax dollars to fund that transition. An ESOP offers an opportunity to do the financial portion of the transition in a very tax-friendly manner. There are certain, this fourth bullet on my page here, there are some circumstances where if you sell to an ESOP, you can defer taxation on the sale. And if you meet all the requirements, you can defer taxation on the sale, and then upon death, there becomes a step-up in basis, and there is never taxation on the sale, no taxation. That's not, I wouldn't say that happens in most ESOPs, but that's a planning situation that's there for the right kind of situation. When I hear about ESOPs, the two main questions come to mind with any kind of transition is value and control. So we talked about the value of the first one. An ESOP's allowed to pay full fair market value, but it cannot pay more. On the control side of things, the employees are the beneficiaries of the trust in an ESOP. So they, in a sense, get financial benefits, but they do not run the company. It is not a democracy where if we sell to an ESOP, we come into a room and ask to vote if we're going to buy a certain kind of coffee, or what do you want for a raise, or do you want to fire someone? Look, that's not what an ESOP is. An ESOP is still ran by a board of directors. It's still managed by the officers of the company, and the employees are still responsible for executing, their day-to-day responsibilities. Nothing changes in an ESOP as far as the way a company is ran. So those are just some overviews I wanted to share with you about ESOP basics. I have an example that really illustrates, I think, the financial benefit of not having a tax obligation. If you have a company and you have $1 million in pre-tax income, it does say on here EBITDA, but pre-tax income essentially, if you have your pre-tax income of $1 million, in today's world, you might have a 40% federal and state obligation for income taxes. That money has to come from somewhere. Ultimately, it comes from the company. In an ESOP scenario, if a 100% S corporation, 100% owned ESOP that's an S corporation, you no longer have a tax obligation. That essentially frees up, in this scenario, $400,000 a year. And with the right kind of planning, you can use the tax savings alone to fund the entire financial portion of the transition. So that's just a key financial benefit, and it gives an opportunity. What that does, those tax, that can help fund the financial portion of the business transition, and it still leaves open the real challenge. The real challenge is the things we're talking about here. It's the management transition. And so whether you're transitioning that from one generation to the next generation, you still are going to face that. The ESOP will not magically fix that part. But when you can take the financial component off the table and essentially convert your company from paying taxes to paying for the transition, that takes one big part off of the table of a problem. So Greg Littman-Stans from Whiter Group, in 2017, earlier this year, March 31st to be exact, Greg and the other owners of the Whiter Group sold 100% of their company to an ESOP. And Greg, maybe you could just give a little background about how you made that decision.
Sure. Well, first of all, we're a marketing firm. We, my wife and I were the primary owners. We were a C Corp. We owned 90% of the company. The business was pretty devastated by the recession. We about halved our size, rolled back, we were in survival mode, and we made some strategic decisions in 2010 and 11 to reinvent ourselves. And it worked, and we experienced significant growth to the point that in 2013, I think was the first time Aaron and I sat down. More background, Aaron and his company have been clients of ours since he was working out in the basement with 2.5 employees. And so we take some of the credit for them and their success. And so it seemed only natural that we turn things around, and I sat down with Aaron in 2013 and asked for a back of the envelope. I said, you know, I've been learning about ESOP for years. I've heard a lot of things because we helped them produce their content, so we heard the bonuses. And at the same time, we started to get exposed to some of our clients who were ESOPs. And I saw some of the things culturally that were really attractive to me. You know, culturally that people cared a lot. People talked about the value they were building, and they acted like owners. And that was something that we had tried to inject in our people to try to get them to accept. And it's hard when they're not benefiting as owners. So 2013, we started talking. Aaron gave me a quick conclusion. He said, you're a long ways away. You know, your revenue is here, it needs to be here. Your cash is here, it needs to be here. You don't have enough employees to make this work. Let's just keep talking. And so fast forward to 2016, August, I think, we sat down and I said, Aaron, we've made a lot of progress. And he was a little skeptical, but he looked at the numbers and he said, you've made more than a lot of progress. You're there. He said, I can tell you should jump into a formal feasibility. And so he got me an estimate, and we started the process immediately because we already knew about our tax liability for 16. And that was a big part of our urgency, was we were in the big tax liability territory. And we knew that if we could get the plan in place by the end of 16, we could fund a lot of the work that it took to get it done, a lot of the legal work, Aaron's participation, the valuation company, all required. And so we did a chop on it and got it set up, got the valuation completed very satisfactorily. That was actually a surprise. One of the things that I'll tell you about Aaron is he's conservative, and his first communication to us was conservative, and it came back even stronger. So when I think about my motivations, our motivations, as Aaron said, we haven't given up one drop of management responsibility. I'm still controlling the company. I have no intention of retiring anytime soon. I'm 59 years old. I'm having a blast. What we really wanted was to benefit from the liquidity transaction. My wife and I are in business together. Our kids are not interested in the business, never have been. And so we really needed to think about how do we start to get the liquidity that we've built out of it, start enjoying some of it without retiring. And ESOP was a perfect way for us to do that. And then the kicker, the real bonus that we hadn't even thought about, but when Aaron came back with some tight pro formas for us on what it would look like, he said, and you guys know that if you stay in the business 10 years, and I don't know if I'm going to stay around 10 years, maybe 8, I don't know, but he showed us what we'd walk away from with the new benefits of the plan we're putting in place, because it's another retirement plan. So we've always had our 401k. We're getting the liquidity from selling the business. Now we've got a 10-year note that we're going to be getting payments every month, and we're going to participate in the new ESOP retirement plan. And so that was an unexpected benefit. And so it's really dramatically changed our outlook on retirement. And at the same time, it's given our people, who some of them stuck with us through the recession, and so they were sticking with us on promises. And now we've been able to follow through on that promise. And so we got a lot of 30 and 40-year-olds who are looking at this and going, holy cow, didn't think it could be this good, and looking at the projections of what their retirements can look like. You know, so it feels like an absolute win-win-win for our situation. Admittedly, it's not good for every situation, for every succession, but for us, it couldn't be better.
Okay, and I was putting up a graphic, but I'm noticing a couple of the pictures are not showing up on the graphic, but I think they're on the printout. I don't know why that is. But basically, you sold in exchange for a 10-year note.
Right.
Monthly payments.
Right.
But nothing up front. I mean, and that's not every ESOP. It can be tailored to liquidity needs. You could have taken some bank financing to get an initial payment.
Right. In our case, we did the 10-year note because we're a service business. We don't have inventory. We don't have plant and equipment. And so it'd be an unsecured note. We looked at, when we talked to the valuation company, we looked at what they would be willing to offer us as far as an interest rate, given that we'd be assuming the risk. And it's an attractive interest rate. So my wealth management guy, when he saw what we're earning, he said, well, that's a damn competitive interest rates you got there. I'll be hard pressed to match that with outside investments. You know, so it's something where we're not ready to walk away because my wife and I are both integral to the business at this point. We're going to be motivated to protect our investment, which to me is a wonderful situation to be in. I love to have that kind of good positive tension. You know, it gets me up in the morning. The valuation process, as Aaron said, we negotiated with a third party. We got what we think is the right market value. We know we had discussions ongoing with some outside entities. We know that we could have gotten a premium, but to get that premium, we would have potentially given up control. And you don't know what that looks like. You have no idea what that looks like. And so we would much rather have the bird in the hand, the control, the motivation that we have.
And I think control, I mentioned value and control, but I think control, when I talk to business owners, that's the most important thing. That even trumps value. The ability to still be in charge, to be able to control your destiny, the destiny of the company. And again, I think as we bring this even to family considerations, if you get to the point where you've got the family that are involved in the business, but the resources aren't there, doing an ESOP is another mechanism to transfer the liquidity of the business, but still retain control with family or other key employees. I wouldn't even just say that has to be just family, but really at that point, the company is still ran. You still are in control of the board.
Yep.
and the management team.
Right, right. And I would say the biggest difference is one that we're just beginning to experience, and that's the conversations we have now. The conversations we have about managing our clients and our profitability with them and our pricing and some of the processes that we're implementing as we grow. We have people who are motivated by the long-term value creation. They're not just motivated by, are we going to earn a bonus this year? They're talking about doing the right thing. And that's not always comfortable in the short term. You know, and so I'm excited because I hear different conversations happening than that were happening a year ago. And people who we actually had a pool for our first, we did our first stock distribution earlier this year. And we had a pool to guess the stock price. And it was amazing the stabs people took at back of the envelope calculations, but they were thinking about it. And they had never thought about it before. So that was, you know, I was moved by that because it demonstrated to me how we had really moved the needle on the way people thought about their company and their investment in it and their potential to gain from it.
Okay, so just to expand on what Greg did with their situation, again, the graphics are not showing up on the PowerPoint.
Imagine
fully,
if you will.
but you've got it in front of you. On the seller's side, they're getting monthly payments over the next 10 years, 120 monthly payments, which you can do a lot of tax planning. Greg?
My wife and I were the primary sellers. We own 90%. We had 5 other shareholders with 2% each. You want to explain that?
Yeah, I'll say that. So as far as this is a seller, that was funded 100% with a promissory note, so no cash changed hands at close. Basically, he's starting to get 120 monthly payments of principal and interest. Yes.
She would be quick to point out.
And 5.
We're each getting a check. It's not just me.
Yes. And 5 other owners.
And 5 other owners, yeah.
And with that annuity stream, essentially, you've been able to make planning decisions and start moving forward with, your plans later in life.
Right.
From retirement.
We built a retirement house. Because I'm 59, no time like the present. And so that's been something that our staff is really excited about as well, because they've seen, yeah, we stuck the course, we survived the recession, we built the company. This can be you too. This can be you in 10 or 15 years. And I can see people thinking that way that had never thought that way before. Because that's exciting. It's that, yeah, it's not a family succession, but these employees they're like family to us. We've treated them that way. Any of you who survived the recession by doing tough things, those people are like family now. They've stuck with you. And so that's the attitude and the culture that we're trying to continue to promote.
I heard a reference to, just one thing there, to 10 years, start planning 10 years in advance. Well, you started planning, you essentially sold with a 10-year plan, but the difference is you're tapping into the liquidity now as you execute that management transition over the next 10 years. It's a completely different outlook than waiting 10 years to build a house.
And from a wealth planning, this is a better way. As I sat down with my wealth management guy, he would much rather work with this 10-year horizon than talk about a lump sum event that is unpredictable and you can't do anything with. And so this is a much better way for us to manage turning that liquidity into our fully integrated retirement plan.
There's a question here.
24.
In a couple of slides, I'll go through some characteristics of an ideal ESOP, so you know what's the sweet spot, if you will. So the seller side, in this case, there was no cash at close. It was 120 monthly payments. There are other ways to structure it to get cash up front. What you see on this next slide here is this ESOP. There's a retirement plan. So the retirement plan is getting funded by the company. So the company, just like a company would make a matching contribution, they make a retirement plan contribution to the ESOP each year. And then the ESOP uses that to make a loan payment, and that's how the employees get stock in their accounts. So this is 100% funded by the company. I like to use the analogy, because the shares get allocated typically over a 30-year period in a full sale. I really like to compare it to a mortgage, a home purchase. But the difference is the company's picking up the tab. And so this presents a real opportunity for the employees of the company to generate wealth, but that takes place without them ever paying a dime of their own money. They're never personally at risk, because the legal shareholder is the ESOP trust. And those employees will come, they will go, and you have the perpetual owner of this ESOP trust that lives on. The third chart, which is, again, I think that you've got the graphic. This basically shares the corporate governance of it, that there is a trustee that is appointed to the ESOP trust. Typically, we're seeing that be an outside person, an independent person, but in theory, it could be someone from the company. And that trustee makes the legal decisions on behalf of the ESOP, which is generally the board voting for the board of directors and setting the stock price each year. And that's basically it. Yeah. Other than those items, the board and the management team run the company. And then the employees still are what they were before. They just have a financial incentive now to grow the value of the company. And different companies have different cultures, and some of them will, have more open book management, involve the employees in decisions. That's okay. It's your choice. Other companies continue to be an ESOP, and they continue to run it top down, and the employees are still generally happy if they understand that, because they're financially rewarded for being employee owners. Oh.
Employees that are brought onto the company within this 10-year plan, are they brought into the ESOP also, or is it a line in the sand from the time you made the transaction?
That's a good question.
Yeah, we actually, actually have the same participation requirements as our 401K. So everybody who's a full-time employee, yes, they become eligible within 60 days. If they work 1,000 hours in a year, they're considered full-time and they participate in the next year's distribution.
And shares are allocated in an example of 100% sale over 30 years. So it ends up being broad-based over time. And then after that 30 years, the question is what happens then? Well, people are retiring, people are leaving. So you're going to have a continuous turnover, churn of the shares. So you're really shooting for, you're really at that point trying to peg it to a benefit level, almost like you've got a 4% match and a 6% ESOP. You're trying to peg it to part of your overall compensation strategy at that point.
Which is, we're already using it as part of our offer sheet when we're trying to recruit somebody. We're trying to estimate a value, and because we know that it's a competitive edge for us because there's no other marketing firms in Northeast Wisconsin who are ESOPs, and so we can promise that to people. And I was selling it actually before the plan was launched. I hired some people in January. And I tipped my hand. I said, here's what's coming. Here's what we're going to do in March. And you're going to be a part of it for 2017. And I should tell you, the other plan provision that's important is we match the vesting to our 401K, which is 5-year vesting, 20% a year. Some people do it that you don't get vested in the ESOP. You go from 0 to 100% at the end of 5 years. And we just felt like that's not right. We'd rather do it on a 20% a year.
Every ESOP there's a lot of flexibility to structure it to meet your needs. And I could say there's no two ESOPs that are the same. Every company has their own unique needs and wants and desires. And so that's the beauty of the ESOP. There's a lot of planning opportunities there. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead, Amy.
Does it have to be 100% ESOP?
It does not. It does not. I'm using that. Use that for a planning example here. You can sell 1%, you can sell 30, you can sell 100%. You can do it in stages over time. We've got clients that have just said, look, the ESOP is going to be in the future, but it's going to be a minority stake. And that's another way it can work with the family. Again, it creates a liquidity event, but maybe the ESOP is a 30% shareholder forever and ever and ever. And that 30% becomes the source of buying out the other shareholders as they leave the company. So, great point.
So then a person quits or retires,
How does an employee get paid out? That's a really good question because this is typically involved with a privately held company and there's no stock market. So it's not like you can go cash in and get Whitehurt Group and cash it in the next day. The company has to plan for this. It's referred to as the repurchase obligation. And it starts out small, but over time it can grow to be the largest obligation of the company. And it's really off the long-term offset of that taxes. I like to come up with the plan that we're going to use the tax savings to pay off the sellers, and then we're going to use the tax savings to help pay for the people when they leave the company are being paid out. So the company ultimately is the one that pays for those shares. If you think about it, any business has this obligation. It's just all lumped into one big purchase. And what the ESOP does is it breaks it up into little mini purchases every year than doing it every generation.
Sir, what's the process for evaluating the stock each year? What's stock?
So, yes, there is a requirement because it's privately held stock that every year you have to have an independent appraisal by an independent appraiser. So when Greg sold the company and the other shareholders, they had an appraiser do a value as of the time of the sale, and now every December 31st, they'll have to have a new appraisal. And that's what's reported on the statements that the employees get each year that reports how many shares they have and what the stock is worth. I put a few statistics up here. There's about 7,000 ESOPs in the country, representing about 14 million participants with total retirement assets of about 1.23 trillion. There's been a lot of ESOP activity. I will also share that number of ESOPs has been staying constant. And I think that's because as new ESOPs are formed, On the other hand, they become very attractive companies that other companies want to buy. And that generally is because you take great companies and you put a more formal corporate governance structure, you put tax savings in place, and they become even stronger companies. So I think that's why you see the number pretty much staying steady over the last 10 years at about the 7,000 mark, is because those companies then are choosing to be sold because they're getting offers that are too good to be true. Again, they control their own destiny, but they're just making a decision that this is too great of a deal, and usually they can continue on what their plans are in a different way. There's some statistics that compare ESOPs and how they outperform their counterpart companies, and the majority, 93% of business owners that have formed an ESOP have been satisfied that they've done so. Okay, so just want to hit with our time that's left here, objectives of selling to an ESOP. And I want to look at the various stakeholders. The company. I call the company the golden goose. It's the most important entity of it all. I even rank that above the sellers, the family, anyone else, because without the company, it doesn't matter. And selling to an ESOP can improve the company's performance, improve cash flow, which can then provide employment stability, increase job satisfaction, and it ultimately aligns the benefits, the objectives of the company with the employees. From the seller, it can provide diversification and a business transition alternative rather than selling to a third party. It can ultimately give business owners complete control over their business transition to make sure that what ultimately takes place is in the best interest of the company, the sellers, the key employees, family, all the employees in the community. I think those are really all your stakeholders that are involved with any kind of business and business transition. And selling to an ESOP will often provide a greater return. And I like to hit that point because when you hear other alternatives, I'll see these grids, and they'll put the ESOP down at the bottom, basically saying, if you want to give the company away at a discount, it's a nice thing to do. The ESOP is very comparable to other third-party alternatives. You got to put them side by side. Sometimes the third party is going to be better. Sometimes the ESOP is going to be better. But the biggest thing I'd say from a planning standpoint, you should at least have the ESOP in the conversation so you know that it's another option that's out there. Management, key employees, I'd put family would be right along there with management and key employees. There are ways to give equity and equity equivalence to management and key employees. You want to use the phantom or the equity equivalence because you want to protect the tax exemption on the ESOP side of things. If the ESOP is the shareholder, the more shareholder they are, or 100% shareholder, and you can give the equity equivalent, you can accomplish the same financial benefits, but the company is going to have a greater tax position. For the employees, it's rewarding those who help build the company. It's giving them a stake in the company that they work for. It's helping either build an ownership culture or taking your culture you already have in place and taking it to the next level. And it's providing another employee benefit. And the community is a big one. Think of the company legacy. By selling to an ESOP, you really are able to protect those key features in the future. And we really see this as you get into the more of the rural areas. You know, if you've got a business in a rural area, how many, you know, if someone's going to come buy you, they're going to want to sell off the parts. And selling to an ESOP, retaining that control, enables you to do that business transition and control the execution of the next part of the business life. This has been hit in other slides already. You're really comparing the internal options, selling to family, selling to key employees, or selling to an ESOP. Really call that an inside purchase. And then you've got the outside of a competitor, private equity, or some other third party. And I think we've got at the bottom there, really an ESOP, to have a thorough plan where you've vetted your options, you know, an ESOP it should be at the table. If you really want to have made sure you've considered all those alternatives. So with the time we've got left, I think we're at the 10-minute mark here or so. Here are the candidates that we would say are your ideal fit. Closely held business, strong balance sheet. It doesn't mean no debt, but you certainly want to have a good balance sheet, because if you sell to an ESOP, you're either going to have bank debt or you're going to have debt to the sellers. One way or another, you're going to have some additional debt on your balance sheet, and you really don't want to be saddled with too much debt coming into it. Cash flow. Cash flow is probably the most important thing. We're focusing on what is the cash flow of the company today, what is the cash flow of the company after this ESOP sale, because we want to make sure that the company can continue to thrive and do the things that you want to do. Taxable income is very important. We've talked about tax benefits. If you don't have taxable income, then you're really not achieving a lot of the tax benefits. Then again, if you don't have taxable income, you may have other challenges that you're working through on the planning side of things.
You don't have much business value either.
Right, and unless it's a long term. I would stress long term, because there are, if you have a short term blip of a few years, especially a cyclical business, you may have a few years where you have a down cycle and an up cycle. But you, as a whole, taxable income gets you the tax benefits. Minimum of 10 to 20 employees. We've got some ESOPs as low as 10 or 11 employees. 15 to 20. There's a couple of reasons why. Number one, there are ongoing expenses to administer an ESOP. And on the low side, that's $15,000 a year. Companies that are larger can absorb that. A company that's on that small side, those fees might be the difference between the ESOP being viable or not, depending on how that goes. And because the IRS created this tax exemption, if you will, they're watching for abuse. They saw when the ESOP could become a tax exempt and not pay taxes, they saw one-person management companies form to shelter taxable income. And so the IRS has put tests in place to make sure it's broad-based, and you need about 10 people in order to satisfy those testing requirements. You need to be an S corporation or a C corporation. We work with LLCs and partnerships all the time, but just as part of this transition, they've got to switch to become an S or a C corporation. Employee effective communication is very helpful between management and employees. You typically are not seeing union companies. I wouldn't say that's a no, but when we see those, typically we're seeing the unions are not in, and the non-employees, the non-union people are in the ESOP. We've got some that do it, but it just becomes it's a negotiation. You have to negotiate the union participation just like any other retirement plan, and that can sometimes become problematic because it's crossing the lines on who's the owner of the company and who's receiving the benefits. Successor management in place, it doesn't have to be, but I think you got one of two options. Either successor management needs to be in place, or you need to be prepared to stick around until successor management can be developed. Either one of those options are fine. But if you come into a company and you want to leave and there's no successor, that's going to ultimately bear in your valuation. That valuation is going to bear out that this company doesn't have a lot of value if you're not there. The potential negative effects of selling to an ESOP: complexity. Those are the words we hear. ESOPs are too expensive, they're too complicated. Those are the words that we're encountering that other people are hearing about ESOPs. And yes, they're a retirement plan. They've got their unique issues, and so there is a level of complexity to it, but not something that can't be overcome with having the right advisors. Cost. There is a cost to evaluate it if ESOP makes sense, a cost to get an appraisal, a cost to have attorneys prepare the documents, to do the due diligence, to have a trustee. There's an upfront cost, and that could be, if you're doing a sale of the company, it could be $150,000 to $200,000. And it could be more. It depends on the size, the number of shareholders, whether you're taking financing. It varies. But there are expenses associated with the sale of a company. And I would say contrast that with any sale. There's going to be, those costs are going to be in play no matter how you sell your company. And then on an ongoing basis, you have this record keeping, because your ESOP is a retirement plan. You have to do the 5,500, you have to do all of the reporting that you would do for a 401k, you also have to do for an ESOP. The repurchase obligation, we mentioned that a little bit ago. How do you pay for the people that are leaving the company and being paid out? So the repurchase obligation exists. What you want to do with the right kind of planning is leverage those tax benefits so that the repurchase obligation is not eating up all of your cash. And in the short-term balance sheet, again, I've got that on here as one other item. Be aware if you're going to add debt, you're going to leverage the company. That's going to have a negative impact on your balance sheet. It's going to be important that at a minimum you have lenders that understand ESOPs and how they work, because that could impact your ability to borrow money in the future if you have not planned accordingly. Any questions? Okay. Well, thank you. Thank you very much.